All right, welcome to How to Use Competitive Analysis for Your Growth Strategy, a webinar by Fedmine and OST Global Solutions. So today's presenters are Olesya Smatrova and Lindsay Carey. And let me tell you a little bit about OST Global Solutions before we get started. OST Global Solutions helps businesses grow, government contractors grow specifically, and we have three lines of business. So we have the GovCon Incubator that takes small companies and helps them grow in a systematic way. And we have a virtual incubator and in-person incubator, co-working incubator in Rockville, Maryland. We also have a business development center of excellence where we help our clients through consulting support in business development, capture, and proposals. And we also have a Bid and Proposal Academy with 18 different courses in every aspect of business development. We've won over $22 billion since 2005 for our clients, and we have supported 18 out of the top 20 federal contractors over the years. And we bring that level of discipline from large businesses to small businesses, and we still support a lot of large businesses as well in their pursuits. And let me also have Lindsay introduce Fedmine.
Great, thanks, Olesya. So Fedmine is a market intelligence platform, and it's not only used by government contractors, but it's also used by some government agencies. Our company was started in 2004 by our CEO, who was a 8A business owner, and he actually had a product company, was very familiar with selling to the federal government, was very successful in that space. There came a point in time where he just decided that the types of market intelligence available to him were lacking. And that's why he went ahead and he sold his business and he started Fedmine. So he spent 3 years working on the product and launched it in 2007. What we do is we pull data from 16 different federal sources. FPDS, which is the Federal Procurement Data System that all agencies have to report their spending to, is the backbone of our platform, and we get updates on a daily basis. What we do is we tie all of the other sources back to FPDS and really connect the dots for you. We allow you to make actionable decisions, and it saves you a huge amount of time. There are various different ways that you can come to those conclusions by using our robust report and search capabilities, which we'll go over some of them today. So back to you, Olesya.
Great. So let's talk about competitive analysis. Competitive analysis is can be opportunity specific, but it can be also general as part of your competitive intelligence. There's actually CI discipline, competitive intelligence, that allows you to determine how should you grow based on the market analysis, based on the competitive field. And many companies, when they really approach their growth strategy when they're small, use a trial and error method. So kind of anything goes, right? So the bad is there's no strategy at all. So a company goes ahead, lists every next code as a capability that it, could spell an explanation for, and take any work that comes your way. And then there's that desperation of saying, okay, we got to make the payroll, we got to keep the cash coming in. So there is a lot of that sort of going all over the place, trying to make ends meet. So that's kind of a very reactive way, not a good way to go. Now, a good way is be somewhat reactive, but use relationships as the foundation with primes, with partners, maybe with the government, and grow where you know people. For example, one of our clients had someone call on them and say, hey, we need you to clean a warehouse this Saturday. So he says, okay, yes, can do, contracting officer, goes and cleans out the warehouse with him and his brother and some of his friends. And then the next thing you know, he is in that agency providing technical services, providing qualified engineers to that contracting officer, so several years down the road. So you can use relationships in the footprint, and he had no plans particularly to get into that agency. It was FAA of all places, but he actually got in and is thriving there. So here's another one. Better strategy is to go ahead, pick 3 agencies, 2, 3 agencies based on what they buy and what you sell, and focus on opportunities coming out of those agencies.
Now, you could pick one agency, let's say it's DHS, it's got multiple components in it, so it's a huge customer. So you're still diversified enough, but you also maintain focus. And that focus essentially allows you not to be spread thin in multiple different areas and do well. The best strategy, however, is combine that focus, combine it with relationships, the good and the better, right? And then go ahead and add competitive analysis to that mix to really give you that strength. Why? Because success leaves clues, right? So you can use a method called benchmarking so that you benchmark to see if you're going down the right path. You can learn from others' mistakes. You can also learn from other people's successes so that you can accelerate your success based on the blueprint someone else has developed. You don't have to be the pioneer. You don't have to charge into the wilderness and, you know, cut all the brush with your machete, so to speak, all by yourself and try to kind of pave the way. It's very, very hard to be the first. It's very hard to be the pioneer. It's very hard to keep learning by trial and error and guessing all the time. Well, you know, should we now hire an HR manager or should we outsource? Should we go ahead and get ISO right now or should we wait a year? Should we get CMMI now or should we get certified later and really focus on revenue generation? So there's a lot of decision making that happens that you could really look at, you know, what have others done in this arena? What have others done? Now, which competitors should you benchmark against, right? So that's a real question. Well, the first answer is a company you admire or fear. So fear means a company you tend to lose to on bids. You get on a bid, you get to, you know, to compete, and then the next thing you know, they keep winning over and over and over again. And you go, well, what is it that they have that we don't? And sometimes the answer may be obvious to say they're bigger than you, they're, you know, they got deeper pockets. Sometimes the answer may not be as obvious. Sometimes it's really not their size. Sometimes something else. So your customer's favorite contractor in the same core competencies, NAICS, and socioeconomic status. Yes, they may have a great relationship, and that's why they keep getting all this business, but maybe, just maybe, and keep your mind open, they may have something else that makes them an excellent company that the customer really respects and really values. Now, you could also pick a company that is successful and growing in the same industry. If you don't have the 1 and 2, or maybe you have just one company in a category 1 and a category 2, you have another company, you need more than one company to go ahead and get yourself a picture as to how the companies grow in your field. You could also look at a company that is successful and growing in the same industry. For example, you also don't pick just any one, right? So you look at different ones, and the criteria I would use would be has transitioned to priming contracts, right? So they're not just subbing to somebody else. Is winning increasingly large contracts, or you're having a hunch that they're doing, right? So you haven't studied data yet, but you're saying, okay, you know, I kind of have heard, or I'm watching this company do that. They're doing really well. They're going gangbusters and they keep winning. Also, is diversified. Not one vehicle, one customer wonder, right? So there's some companies that just get lucky. Like I know one company that I worked with in the past, and they were not growing. Like a couple decades pass by, and then they get on one vehicle where there were only 3 competitors, and they just start growing gangbusters because they're winning all the task orders, right? So this is a one vehicle wonder, right? That company, I know that they've struggled a lot to catch up, to actually build the capacity from within to really become a good company in the process, but they didn't start out that way. So there is that sort of phenomenon, and that's not who you want to emulate. You want to make sure that you're looking at good companies, and companies that are good contractors. They have good reputation with the customers. They have good reputations with partners and employees. Again, you want to emulate success. So I'll turn this over to Lindsay. She has come up with a fictional company that she has herself, and she's going to demonstrate some of the concepts that I'm teaching here as part of data analysis.
that's really crucial in business development.
Great, thanks, Alessia. Let me get queued up here. All right, Alessia, can you see my screen?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So the topic of today's webinar is growing through competitive analysis. So Alessia mentioned that there are several different ways that you can grow. Competitive analysis is our focus today. And my company is starting out. The VA is our customer, one of our customers, our biggest, and my primary NAICS code is 541512. I'm also a service disabled veteran owned company. So using data, I can narrow down and identify a list of competitors and emulate what they're doing and understand what their strategy is. So as an example, I am going to search for companies who win contracts in 541512 and that also work with my primary customer, who is the VA.
And 541412, what does that NAICS code stand for, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, Lindsay?
Sure. So it is actually Computer Systems Design Services.
Yeah. So you have a small business. You're trying to go ahead and create yourself a blueprint for how you would want to grow, and you think that VA is your focus, and this is your NAICS code, and you're trying to figure out competitive field, correct?
Exactly. I want to, I see certain competitors come up, but I want to spot check and also see if there are any others that I might have missed, and then take a deeper look at what they're doing and how they're winning contracts and what their portfolio looks like. So I'm using technology, I'm using data to come up with that list. So what I can see here right off the bat is that I have my top 10 prime contractors, not necessarily small businesses. As I mentioned before, I have an SDVOSB. So to refine my list a little further, I want to go into the top set-asides, and I'm going to focus on companies winning SDVOSB contracts. So I've got a list here, and once again, this is one way that I could come up with a list of competitors to understand their growth strategy. But there are some other ways that you could do this also. One of them would be to actually go into the agency, an agency profile, and take a look at the top primes by socioeconomic status, or alternatively, I could focus on a GWAC that I'm on and see who my competitors are there. So if you took T4NG, for example, you could come up with a list of competitors in that way as well. So just a few suggestions on how to find and identify these competitors. You've probably seen them before. I know with my company, I've seen a lot of these show up. And further along in the webinar, we're actually going to take a deep dive into a competitor profile and talk about how they've grown and what their strategy was. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Alessia to go ahead and talk about what we can learn from a competitor. And then we'll take a look into a competitor profile.
All right, so I'm going to make myself the presenter. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the kinds of things that you could gain insight into when you're looking at the competitors. What can you really learn from a competitor? Because you can look at the competitors until you turn blue in the face, but what is useful to you? So, and we only have 1 hour to really cover, so you will get some of the highlights, but at least that will get you started thinking in the right direction. So I have a question here. May I have a copy of your slide presentation? This is great information. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, you absolutely will. After the class, you'll get a recording of this class and the presentation as well. All right, so what can you learn from a competitor? How did the company actually get started? What were their first customers and contracts? So that's Genesis story, especially if you're just starting out, or if you're small, or if you got stuck, right? So if you actually got to a certain size and got stuck, it is really useful to see how did others actually make it out of the gate and through the valley of death, perhaps, right? So when the businesses, businesses don't grow very evenly, right? So there's a very different growth pattern when you're going from 0 to 1 million, or from 1 million to 5 million, from 5 million to 10 million, from 10 million to 20. And then the jumps become bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So you get to that $80 million, your next jump is like 200 million until you get really comfortable, because companies, when they're like in that $80 million range, they're not very happy. They're not very satisfied because it's a very difficult area to play in. So the jumps are really not very even, and a lot of the times making it through those different thresholds is really, really hard. It takes very different skills to make a company grow. And actually observing how the companies get started, how they get out of the gate, what is their journey, is very interesting and insightful. What background did the owners have? That's another question. What skills do they have that you don't, that you could perhaps acquire, right? So that may be a learning opportunity for you there. So if you can attribute and if you can see the correlation between their success and their skills, or maybe their relationships that you could infuse into your company. What knowledge and connections did they bring to the table that you assume that they did because of their background, where they came from, and what did they start winning first, right? How fast did they grow? Was that absolutely stratospheric and you just saw the company just go up and up and up and up, or did they make some mistakes in the beginning? They got perhaps vehicles they didn't need. They perhaps got some small contracts, and you see this gap where you obviously see they struggled. Sometimes it's just literally maybe not necessarily for learning as much as for motivation for you from a business growth perspective, that they made it and you can make it too. So what contract vehicles and schedules are they on? That is a really important thing. If they're a main competitor and they have a portfolio that this customer uses and you don't, well, guess what? You are in deep kimchi right there, right? So you need to make sure that you have that right portfolio to keep winning business from your customer. Otherwise, they're going to take it all away. Also, how quickly since their inception did they get all these vehicles? Did they use the vehicles they got right out of the gate, or did they not? So that could be really an interesting story to read into. So I'm going to let Lindsay actually show some of this, and we're going to do a little bit of investigative example here to show you how that thought process would happen.
Great, thanks, Alessia. And before we go into a deep dive of a profile, Angela, I just wanted to follow up on your question too. We'll also be sending links to some of the reports that I'm showing, so you'll have a copy of these reports as well. So back to my company, we identified a list of competitors, and I'm just going to choose one that I see quite often, Tista Science and Technology, and we will go into a company profile here. So, these are the types of things that you'll see that are going to help you in your competitive analysis. So I can see how quickly they've grown. Now, our data does go all the way back to 2004. For this particular view, I can see that they had 14.5 million in 2012. And last year, they were over 100 million. So that's a pretty quick growth. So really, we want to understand how did they do that? Another report that you're able to run in FedMine is to pull all of their transactions and their contracts since 2004. And I can see here that actually Tista, it looks like they started with the federal government in 2008 based on this data. And what it's showing you is that they started out with a GSA schedule and started on Seaport E. And then from there, they've kind of gone into working with the IRS, who is still one of their primary customers. You can see things like what the contract amounts were. Did they, they started right out of the gate winning large contracts, or were they smaller in value? And, what type of work they started in doing. Are they still doing that type of work? Alessia, is there anything else here that you can point out that I'm missing from the data? What story it's telling?
So it looks like they rushed into getting that Seaport E, right? So do you see much work coming out of Seaport E other than the minimum amount of $2,500?
No.
They probably paid more to write that proposal. So that was probably a poorly researched way of getting on a vehicle. They were like, oh, we're gonna get on a vehicle, we gotta get that federal supply schedule. And it looks like, there wasn't really much that was coming out on that. They actually got business in all the other ways. It looks like maybe a relationship or something like that with the IRS, and they started building that footprint with the IRS. You can see a small contract, a larger contract, and they're doing a variety of projects and consulting work for the IRS.
Yeah, and it also looks like it was a slower start. I mean, you can see I'm just on page 1 of their contracts and transactions, and we're all the way in FY11 on this page. So what I would do, in my competitive analysis is probably download all of this information and then dissect it further that way. By downloading this to XLS, so I can take a look at all their transactions and actually see what the contract descriptions were, and then the trends with, we see they started with IRS and C4D and GSA schedule, but then how did they grow from there? So taking that download and doing even more of a deeper dive. Switching back to the profile though, you can see who their top customers are, and their portfolio HHS makes up almost 50%. But one of the things Alessia mentioned is, focusing on a competitor who has a diversified portfolio. And we can see here based on their profile that they do. They do have a diversified portfolio with customers, as well as, the GWACs that they're on. So you can take a look at their GWACs, and just confirming what Alessia noticed. They were on C4D back in 2008, and maybe it wasn't the best idea. So learning from mistakes as well. Some of the other things that I can see here that I would want to pay attention to are, where they're winning contracts by place of performance. Are they filing any protests? How they're winning by set aside. So lots of different data points to understand this company's strategy. As I scroll down too, I can see their GSA contract actions, their NAICS codes. They were in 8A, that has already exited. They exited the program in 2016. So that means that they actually got their 8A pretty much right when they started doing work with the federal government as well. And then further on down, I can also see any prime relationships they have. So I can see that they have a relationship with WellPoint, at least that has been reported. And we can talk a little later potentially about the frequency with which subcontractors are reported and some of the rules around that.
Lindsay, may I interrupt you? So I'm noticing something. It's really interesting. Competitive analysis is a process of discovery, but you can see that the year established in your database is 2005. So it looks like in 2008 is when they started to really win their first prime contracts, really. So this is when they really started breaking in. In 2007, I think, is when it shows you that they have gotten their 8A or something like that. If you scroll down a little bit, I noticed something right there as well.
Yeah, in 2007, yeah.
Yeah, in 2007, so they got into the 8A program. So it's really interesting how, like, you can see that evolution, that for the first 3 years, really, they did not do any priming whatsoever. And you see how they broke in at the IRS, but they really tried to do that first with the GSA schedule, and to give themselves a vehicle and to give themselves another vehicle. But some of those vehicles weren't used, perhaps because that customer was not using those vehicles right away. But the Treasury does use GSA quite a bit, so I see the thinking there for them to actually do this. Did they keep that GSA vehicle, by the way? GSA schedule, can you see that?
Let's see. Yeah, so these are the GSA schedules that they're currently on, 70 and 8A stars too. And it looks like they're on 70 until June, and stars 2 until August of 2021.
Which is not the one that they had initially applied for, it looks like.
Yeah.
So because you can actually lose your GSA schedule if you don't sell on it very quickly,
right.
And you have to maintain your minimum. So eventually they went back to GSA and got the vehicles that their customers use instead of what they actually started out with in the first place. So this is one of those lessons learned that you can learn from a competitive analysis of for your competition, is what vehicles do they hold and what vehicles do they use in a similar NAICS codes, because you can see what vehicles are, have money that's being awarded to them and what are preferred by the customers, because the contracting officer there are a lot of the times they learn 1 or 2 or 3 ways to award a contract, and that's what they stick to. They don't get very adventurous with that at all.
Yeah, you can actually do some searches in FedMine to show you the companies that are on schedules but aren't winning any money, any obligations against those schedules. So you could do a $0 search for GSA Schedule 70 to see who all the contract holders are. And do you know, Alessia, the number of years that you can be on the schedule without winning any awards before you're...
2 years, and you have to win at least $25,000. Or you're going to be booted out. Well, you're not going to be automatically booted out. You'll get a letter, and then you can argue back, hey, you know, we've made all these changes, we've done all these great things, we have all these things in the, you know, that are cooking in the process, please extend it. And so then the GSA thinks about how much they can extend it by. It will be a year, maybe half a year, maybe a few months, where they give you a little bit of a grace period, but then boom, you know, they will take it away.
Good to know. Warning letter. So besides the data here available on the company profile, we do also link the website. So I'm actually going to go into TISTA's website and see if there's anything else that I can gather in my competitive analysis from their website. So Alessia mentioned earlier in the webinar that you should take a look at the leadership at the company and also certifications. See what type of, if there are any certifications that they have. You know, do they have a good reputation? What do you see about them in the news? So all of these are things that you can find generally on the company website. And I'm just going to go ahead and look at contract vehicles. I want to confirm what I saw, what contract vehicles they're on. You can see, you know, what they do. Make sure they're doing similar things as you if you're identifying them as a competitor and you want to understand their growth strategy. And then you can also go into...
Lindsay, if I interrupt you for just a second, another interesting thing is on your list of vehicles, they did not have, like as a prime, they did not have certain vehicles that they're actually showing here. It looks like they may be actually as a sub on somebody else's team, so they're showing you more vehicles that the customer can access them through.
Exactly. So we do have subcontracting data, but for the GWAX portion of the company profile, it is showing who, it's showing the primes. It's showing the GWAX that they're a prime on. So that's a really good point. On the company profile, sometimes you'll come and you'll see, or the website rather, you'll see there's additional GWAX, and that is likely because they're a subcontractor on these GWAX. Thanks for pointing that out. So, you know, you can see their leadership and the type of backgrounds that their leadership has. And, you know, if there's anything that you could take away from their biographies to emulate, you know, potentially if they have any certifications or if they've gone through any specific type of training or classes that you could use for your company as well. So I'm just taking a look at their president, and what we can gather here is that he was actually in the military. I believe he was in the Navy, and he has over 20 years of experience. And then he went on to take executive training at Harvard. So perhaps that's something that I could do in my company. So it's really important in your competitive analysis to take a look at the leadership and their backgrounds. And I'll notice as I move along here that they have pretty diverse backgrounds. So Eric actually worked for the Department of Transportation for quite some time. And then we have their president who was in the Navy. And if I take a look at some of the other leaders here, I can see Connie has a lot of experience at HHS. So not only, it kind of tells a story that their customers are diversified, and maybe it's because their leadership also brings that to the table with their experience. And then the other thing that I wanted to take a look at actually is, do they have any certifications? And it might not be touted right here, you know, where you can see it in their website, but sometimes if you go to hidden places like job openings, you can see here that they are a CMMI maturity level 3 company, so they have that certification. So it's definitely important to take a look at all of the different menus within the website, because you might find some interesting things here in your analysis. So with that, Alessia, unless you have anything else to add, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we can talk about how to read into past performance to better understand a company's story.
All right, sounds good. And I have a question here whether this is $25,000 minimum for GSA, whether, let me just read the whole question. So I thought a vendor must sell a minimum of $25,000 per year on the GSA schedule. You said a minimum of $25,000 over 2 years. Is that correct? I'm going to verify that. That's what I recall. But I'm going to verify that. Maybe Lindsay can verify that while I'm presenting the slide, and she can confirm that on the SBA website. But I believe that you have a chance to get a contract for $25,000 minimum, and you have 2 years to get that done. So I don't believe it's a $25,000 a year threshold, but I may be wrong. Again, there's that senility that slowly descends, and who knows?
Yeah, I'll see what I can find, and if it's not addressed during the rest of today's webinar, we'll certainly follow up with you.
Yeah, and anybody who knows for sure, just do chime in. So it's 25. Yeah, so somebody confirmed. Okay, $25,000 for the first 2 years. Then after that, it's $25,000 per year. So thank you, Kim. All right. So I did remember it correctly. All right. So, and you were right too, partially. So it's after that. There's a minimum after that per year as well. All right. So let's go ahead. Can you guys see my slides?
Yep.
All right. So what does the past performance story actually tell us about a company when you start studying that? So how did they generate past performance to position themselves for sequences of similar types of work? So what was the chicken? What was actually the egg? What came first? What came second? Like in this particular case that Lindsay was using, an example was Tista. They, in fact, had subbed for the first periods of time. And you can see some subcontractor data, right, in FedMine, Lindsay?
You can, and we'll go into that here momentarily. But yes, you can see the subcontractor data as long as it's been reported. We should talk about that.
Right. So it does not always get reported, and you also won't be able to see probably their commercial work. So if the company actually had started with some commercial work, you won't be able to read into that as well. So a lot of that revenue is not reported. It looks like a zero, but it may not be. Some of the data you can actually get from Dun & Bradstreet to look at the company's history, and you can glean a little bit into their financials earlier before sort of them making it on the radar in a federal procurement data system, and all of that data kind of seeping into our system. Also, what subcontracts have they been winning and awarding? So their subcontract data, like who do they work with? Who do they tend to team with? People generally, they operate, they move around in tribes, right? So who are their tribesmates? Who are the people you may want to be acquainted with, you may want to start working with as well, that are good companies and they're working with and they have a good relationship. Who do they tend to team with in general going after pursuits, and how do they seem to transition to priming? What was their sort of the stepping stones? You could see, like, for example, with Tista, there was a small contract, there was a training contract for $36,000, and then there was another contract that was fairly small, and finally they got that $1 million or almost $2 million contract that actually got them to be working as a prime and in positioning their past performance for other projects. And there was still a bunch of really small contracts around that.
So we actually have a question, and this is probably a good time to interject with this question because it's about subcontracting. You mentioned a subcontractor could list its prime contractor's GWAC on the subcontractor website. Could you please explain how the subcontractor could use the prime contractor's GWAC as its own contracting vehicle? I can take a stab at answering the question. What I've noticed is that on our platform, when you go to a company profile and you look at the GWACs that the vendor is on, it's only going to list the GWACs that they're a prime on. It does not show you if they're a subcontractor on a GWAC. But oftentimes, if you go to a company website and you see their list of GWACs and schedules that they're on, it could be greater than what's shown in the publicly available data because they're a subcontractor on the GWAC. And I don't know if they're getting their primes permission to list it on their website, or they're,
Sure.
yeah.
I'm sure. So let me elaborate on that a little bit, Lindsay. So I
Thanks.
think the question is, why would they do that? Well, it's all about a customer's way of accessing you, right? So like I had mentioned earlier, a contracting officer is not a particularly adventurous creature, most of them. I mean, it's a gross generalization. I mean, there are lots of excellent contracting officers out there, but the majority are not very adventurous people. They are terrified of making a mistake. They go sort of this very tried and true route where they just don't deviate much. So they usually the sort of the 2 to 3 trick pony, right? So you have an 8A contract award. They know how to do that. If you're in the VA, they probably know how to do SDV, OSB as well. But outside of that agency, it seems like that knowledge absolutely just dissipates, right? So they also will know how to award something under a GSA schedule, possibly. Just because GSA is really aggressive, they're educating different contracting officers, so they have a great outreach program and they're promoting the daylights out of it, right? And then the third is probably a vehicle that agency uses. Well, here's where this comes into play. If you're a prime or a sub on that vehicle, you want a contracting officer to access you, you give them a way to access you. If you're an 8A, more power to you. If you're an SDVOSB and this is Veterans Administration, more power to you. If you're a woman-owned small business, good luck to you, right? Unless the contracting officer really knows what they're doing. And even at the National Contracts Management Association and CMA, where you would think there's like a level of excellence with the contracting officers there attend that, I have not seen that level of excellence where they know that, for example, woman-owned small business, you can just literally award any kind of contract to that you could award to an 8A in certain NAICS codes. Or SDV-USB is pretty much got the same benefits as the 8A now, or HubZone. And you essentially could do the same thing. So that's why they put those vehicles there, is because that's a way to get to them. Even as a sub, yes, the prime is going to have a cut probably from that task order, but they are actually going to get the bulk of the work, and this customer is going to get that contractor one way or another. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Alessia.
And Lindsay, did you want to elaborate on this and show us maybe some subcontracts information of what kind of things can you see?
Yeah.
Vista?
On the topic of subcontractors, and I'm actually going to use a different competitor. I'm going to switch things up a little bit. So in my competitive analysis, when I came up with that list, I looked at a VA GWAC and got a greater list of potential competitors, and I noticed a company, Kforce, who I've also come up against. And so I want to see who their prime relationships are with, and maybe if they have any companies that they're subbing to. So I'm going to use our subcontract search, and I could just look within the VA, but I wanted a more big picture view to understand their strategy. Other criteria that you have here are location filters, NAICS code filters, and then you come down to where you actually type in the name of the subcontractor. So as I mentioned, I noticed Kforce. I want to take a look at who their primes are. And I'm going to look at the past 6 fiscal years. And we'll see, that's strange. Technology. I think it might be all one word. There we go. So just another thing with data, you need to try a few different variations, especially if the company has an acronym or if they're doing business as another name. So lesson learned, Kforce is all one word. And what I can see here is who their prime contractors are. I can start noticing trends if they have the same primes over and over. These are good relationships that they have formed. So it looks like they work with Accenture and Mantech within my primary NAICS code, and I can also see who the agency is and the amounts that they're getting from these contracts, as well as any project descriptions. So again, these are who they have their relationships with, and I could download this to dissect it even further. a lot of Accenture. They have a lot of subcontracts with Accenture and Mantech.
As you can see, people tend to go, I call it the Bob factor, right? So you right away go to Bob anytime that you have an opportunity to work with someone. And so Kforce is Accenture's Bob, right? So anytime they have an opportunity to have a small business, then somebody dials the phone and there you are. Once you establish that relationship, nobody's really doing that competitive analysis, trying to figure out, okay, who is the best company for this? Instead, they're just picking up the phone and dialing you.
Yeah, so I'm down to the bottom of my list, and pretty much across the board, they've got the same prime relationships, the same 4 to 5 prime to sub relationships, with Accenture being the largest. So that's interesting.
Hewlett Packard there as well. So it looks like they've actually diversified into Hewlett Packard as well, HP.
Yeah, DXC, who is owned, I guess, by Hewlett Packard as the parent company.
And so where do you get, I'm kind of curious, FedMine, where do you guys get the subcontractor data, and what are the limitations to that? Do you see everything, every subcontractor, or is there like...
Unfortunately, no. We get asked this question a lot. So our subcontractor data is coming from ESRS, and it's coming from USA Spending. And those sources we pull on a weekly basis. So it's updated in real time. The requirements, to my knowledge, and Alessia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that subcontracting is reported 2 times a year, and there are certain business size requirements for who has to report and who doesn't. And also another thing that I believe comes into play is if the original contract had a subcontract plan, then it has to be reported as well. So that is what I know. And unfortunately, you might come across a company profile and for a fact that they do subcontracting, but it's just not there. And that is because of those limitations with size standards and if the contract actually had a subcontract plan or not.
Yeah. So, but this is a good source. This is a data point. Just with anything, just when you're really doing any kind of research or any kind of analysis, having something like that at your fingertips is invaluable. But if you're not finding something, another great way is to look at press releases, to look on the web, to look in Google and see who is saying on a team with so and so and so, we won this contract. Somebody really happy on that team is talking, and you're getting that competitive information. So it's a great way to correlate all of the pieces of data that are available, and the ones where you don't have to spend a lot of time searching because they're all aggregated for you. This is why I'm a big proponent of platforms such as FedMine, is because you don't have to spend hours sifting through that, figuring that out, and then when you are not finding something, then you can go elsewhere and spend that time searching. So I have a question here: are there are these years fiscal years or calendar years, Lindsay?
Fiscal years, yeah. So we do our reporting by fiscal year. You could do other searches by calendar year if you want to, but for our reporting purposes for these canned reports that I've been showing throughout today's webinar, it is by fiscal year. So we have briefly talked about another piece of competitive analysis, and that's understanding how companies are winning by set aside. So I'm actually going to turn it back to you, Alessia, to discuss more in depth the set aside requirements and also how competitors are winning by set aside.
All right. So in case you guys, from all the switching back and forth, you have to resize the screens too, because I'm having to resize mine. So in case you're like zooming in and out, just change your screen resolution and drag it out and drag it in. So hopefully it's not as, on your end, it's not the same as on my end here. So you also want to kind of look at, are they winning by set aside? So for example, if they're in the 8A program, do they seem to be compliant with the SB 8A requirements when it comes to their proportion of 8A work versus non-8A work? Or do they need a corrective action, or doesn't the SBA need to find out? So it's one of those things that, you may be the one who tips them a little bit, right? If this company has been taking all of the 8A contracts, because you need to understand in the 8A program, you can't just keep breaking up the 8A work, right? So there's a transition period. And at the end of year 9, 55% of your activity should not be 8A. So you should be transitioning out of the 8A program And how close is the company to graduating from the 8A program? That should tell you the story. If they're in a hub zone program, how do they meet the requirements to stay in the program? For example, where do they hire from predominantly? Where are they hiring efforts? Is it a local college they're hiring from that you could emulate? Is there some sort of a labor pool that you have not tapped into that they're getting people from? What programs are they working on? What locations that are located in a hub zone that maybe you could be competing if you really want that designation, and you could emulate their successes. Do they win sole source contracts predominantly? They crack the code on how to do that. Who do they win them from? What mentor protege and other prime relationships have they formed? So here's an example from FedMine. I'll let Lindsay talk about it, of how you could easily see right away the competitive field and how the 8A programs companies are doing where it comes to transition program standards.
Yeah, thanks, Alessia. So this is an example. It's a 8A compliance matrix, and I actually pulled it for a particular district office, the Washington district office, and sorted it by 8A program year. So what you see here is all of the 8As in the Washington district office who are in their 9th year. And the 45% is the percentage of 8A contracts that they can have in their portfolio in their 9th year. So they need to have 45% 8A, 55 non-8A. And then as you scroll across here to the right, you can see the number of 8A contracts they still have, the dollars obligated, and then their percentage versus non-8A contracts. And so you can see you can identify very quickly who is not compliant. So these ones that have 0% is kind of interesting. So they're exiting the program a little bit early, I guess. And then you still see some that are at 98% when they should be at 45%. This one here is compliant, the Commercial Liners Inc. or Commercial Links Inc. So it's just a very interesting table here that you can run using data and to see the companies that are compliant versus non-compliant. Our previous webinar that we had, our first webinar in the series, was talking about how to take advantage of your 8A, and actually this report, come to think of it, could be a good one to use to potentially team with some of these 8As that still have 8A contracts in their portfolio that really shouldn't. So just another idea there, but that is what this graphic is showing you, our compliance matrix.
Right, and we have a question here. A government agency has to use set-asides or select a company, I guess, to select with set-aside designation, select a company with set-aside designation. So, the agency has certain small business goals that it has to meet, right? So 8A program being one, hub zone is another one that they always struggle to meet, and another one is women-owned, SDVOSB. So there's a certain percentage that comprises their overall small business goal, and they tend to be very serious about meeting that. Now, they don't. There's whole set of rules about actually issuing a sole source to an 8A company or whatever other socioeconomic set-aside company. So when they issue a sole source, then there should be no other company in that category performing this kind of work. If there's 2 or more 8As, it has to be actually a competitive 8A process. But a lot of times, because it's not advertised in the process of the contracting officer just going through that award process, no other 8A really jumps up and raises their hand and saying, "Hey, we're here too. Let's go ahead and let's have a competition." So a lot of the times the agency just goes with the default, whatever is easier at the moment, how to get the contract done quickly enough. But if you know about different opportunities, if you use source of data like a FedMine, a lot fewer opportunities will go sole source, because companies will make sure that the contracting officer knows about their capabilities and will not be going pressing the easy button essentially and going the easy way to just hand it to the company. I hope I answered your question. If not, please rephrase it. All right, so growth certifications. Let's talk about the growth. Lindsay mentioned earlier about different kind of the blueprint that the company has certification wise. So you would probably look at several companies in your industry to really see if there's a trend there. No, don't just look at one, because they may have just jumped the gun as well, right? So, but how soon did they increase in dollar value in added employees? So that really goes together with their winning record. But how have they been purchased or bought other companies? So that's another one. And what certifications do they tout on their website? Did any of the contracts they won require these certifications according to their archived RFPs? And also, have they protested much, and what have they protested? One tip that I'm going to give you here, and this is something that I found over the years as a great sort of covert strategy, is to go ahead and look up their website, your arch nemesis website, on the Wayback Machine. How do they hire different people? So Wayback Machine, and put that in Google, the Wayback Machine actually takes snapshots of all the websites over the years. So let's say that this is a new website for Tista, and they just figure it out, and put all their staff and everything else. What did Tista have in 2007? What did they have in 2010? What staff did they advertise? What awards did they advertise? What certifications did they advertise? Sometimes you can literally look at the company and kind of use a time machine to go back and investigate that. And Lindsay is going to show you some ways that, like when she jumps into the website from the company, how would you go about, for example, looking what certifications does Tista have? Can you show us?
Yes. So I'm actually, let me hold on one second. And I know we're kind of coming up here on time, so I'm going to go quickly. What I was going to show is actually our protest search. And I did want to talk about something else Alessia had in her slide about growth is understanding if the company has purchased any other companies or if they have been purchased, and that's something that you can see in FedMine. You can see all the subsidiaries, which would include acquisitions, and also if the company was purchased, then that profile would roll up to the parent company done. So I did want to mention that. But one of the things that Alessia mentioned in the growth and certification slide prior is, are they protesting? And how often are they protesting? What are they protesting? These are all really important things to know if you're trying to emulate a company in their growth strategy. You probably don't want to pick a company that's just letting things be and not protesting when they rightly, so should have been up for that contract or won that contract. So you can use FedMine and actually run protest searches. You can do it on the name of a company, on solicitation numbers, on customers, and we're just going to do a quick example here on Tista to see how frequently they're protesting, what they're protesting, do they keep protesting with the same agency? And you can also go into the actual files oftentimes and see if there's any information there, like pricing information. So this is just telling me that they don't protest too much to be annoying and not fruitful. And you can also see if they're winning any protests. It looks like a lot of them,
dismissed. That actually requires a little bit more investigation. So no, they have not won anything, but there's only a couple of things here. They're either dismissed or denied. So some of it may be that the agency actually settled behind the scenes, so that the company actually got what they needed out of that, and then they basically thrown them a bone. The government has thrown them a bone so that they would go away. So withdrawn maybe one of those things, and dismissed maybe another one.
What about without action?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Without action is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just, showing you once again how frequently. So it looks like they did some protesting in earlier years, but they haven't since 2015. And you can also take a look at any of those documents as well to see the decisions, background, and if there's any pricing hidden within the document. So definitely a good thing to do in your competitive analysis. You want to cover every single thing that you can, every single data point, and understand if the company that you're trying to emulate is protesting, if they're not, what they're protesting, etc. So I just talked about pricing, mentioned it very briefly, and I'm actually going to turn it back to Alessia to go into more in depth on a pricing analysis, and then finish up with lessons learned, because we do only have 5 minutes. There was no question, just some feedback, so I'm not going to read it, but thank you, Thomas.
Great. So yeah, so certifications, always look at their website, and a lot of the times people will tie out their CMMI level 3 ISO, and sometimes it's really nice to trace back and see when they got that. So on the labor rates analysis, what Lindsay was mentioning is you can identify vehicles that the company has as their GWACs that publish rates, like GSA schedules, for example, publish rates. Look at this website. This is the calc.gsa.gov website that allows you to search awarded ceiling rates for labor categories. Now, realize this is ceiling rates are going to be discounted by a percentage, but this at least gives you a benchmark as to how your competitors are pricing their services. And key here is to find out and match labor category descriptions with the ones that they have, so that you could see, okay, you know, with this labor category description, here's what I pay in salary, and here's what's being charged to the government. So that, you know, when you have that salary information, you can understand the salary that's specific to the location and what is the wrap rate that goes on top of that salary, because that allows you essentially to reverse engineer the rates for the number of staff and specific labor categories for a contract. So you literally can figure out your competitor's wrap rate if you know enough about each individual contracts, how many bodies are there when you download that contract, and when you look at you know, the total value of that, and you understand what the salaries that are being paid to that staff are. So now I have a question here from Greg Jones, as curious, what would you estimate are the number of businesses that start off as 1 or 2 person companies, particularly in a 5415 tech services area? What do you think there?
Yes, so I was reading the question as you were talking too, and that is a good question. I could run some searches that would identify, like currently or within a particular time period, companies that had between 1 and, let's say, 5 employees within the 5415 NAICS, to see how many there are and how many are actually winning contracts. But it would be time parameter specific. So in order to tell if they started off that way, then you might want to go back in time and do that. That's a little bit difficult to do, but there are certain ways that you could kind of massage it to understand that. I don't know if you had any other ideas, Alessia. You could do employee count searches.
Right, so employee counts are not very accurate, right, the way they're being reported. So they're approximations. So realize that. So you know, the data is not really perfect there, but you can get an idea. A lot of the times, looking at your competitive field, and yes, you can run those searches by number of employees in a company. Realize it's not very accurate. Now, as to the personal experience, anecdotal experience, you generally have more companies starting with partners than just one person in a company. So there are a lot fewer companies where the person just does it alone. Now, with partners, starting something with partners, you also want to make sure that that's a marriage made in heaven and not marriage made in hell, right? So because that's kind of like, I hear a lot of horror stories too through my Vistage network, for example, where partners don't really get along. So I'm not sure where you were going with that question, but you know, that's a very good question to figure out how did people get started.
Yeah.
All right, so lessons learned from all of this, to kind of sum it up, what we were just covering today is, what can you take away from your inquiry when you're doing competitive analysis? It's very important not to just look at the company, but make certain conclusions for yourself, to come into that inquiry with a set of questions and then come out with those questions answered. That's what benchmarking is all about. It's not just a general study. And sometimes you find things that are surprising, right, when you're inquiring, but also coming in with a set of questions you want answered so that you gain that strategic insight. How should you invest in capacity building and building up your company, investing back into your company? Let's say if your arch nemesis has CMMI level 3, should you get CMMI? If they have ISO and the customer keeps requiring ISO and to qualify you for different vehicles, should you get that? So things like that, very important decisions that come out of that analysis. What credentials should you prioritize? Should you get ISO first, then CMMI, or the other way around? Should you perhaps focus on something else, like get a SCIF or not? If bidding against a company that you've studied, what can you go ahead and neutralize through ghosting? Like you found out that they, sold off a division and now they cannot get their act together, for example. Could you use that in ghosting? Could you emulate? Because again, success leaves clues. Why don't you just emulate what they're doing really well? Or could you tell a better story about? You could see, hey, they're doing kind of a shoddy job marketing this capability and that capability. What if I had a similar capability and I told a better story about? And that's what it's all about. All right, let's go ahead and I'll leave some room for questions. We probably have, what, no time left? Well, we'll give another extra 2 minutes.
No time left, but here, there's Greg. Gone
Greg,
to the library to find labor rates. Is this a method or is there something I'm missing?
No, that website that we just showed on the screen, we'll send you the slide deck. Try that website as well. So GSA library is perfectly okay to go ahead and download their copy of their contract. So can you talk a little about woman-owned small business? How can woman-owned small business can get sole source contracts? I missed the part where you talked about 8A, woman-owned small business, contractor officers were explaining subcontractor GWACs. And also another question is, will the presentation be available to us? I missed the beginning. Yes, it will be available, Robin. All right, so the women-owned small businesses in certain NAICS codes where women are underrepresented can get sole source awards up to pretty much the same amounts as 8A contracts. Now, the contracting officer has to know how to do that, and not every contracting officer does, unfortunately. So that's the problem with a lot of this stuff is that, yes, you need to look up go on the SBA website and look up whether your NAICS code under which you're trying to get the contract is actually on that list. Like the other day, I had a lady who had a cleaning services, janitorial services company, and she came to me and she said, can I get a woman-owned small business sole source contracts? And it was very clear that yes, that NAICS code is in that list. A lot of janitorial companies are owned by men, not a lot of women. So her business is underrepresented, therefore SBA allows for sole source in that arena. I hope that explains that. Any other questions?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, so let's go ahead and conclude. So we have another webinar coming up next week. So please make sure, if you're not already registered, register for that. Lindsay and I are going to be doing that together again. And the contact information is here. So myself and David Huff from OST side, and you also have Lindsay Carey or Chisha Mehan from the FedMind side. Please feel free to reach out to us. And if you're interested in our incubator for small businesses, do as well, or our Bid Proposal Academy courses. And we'll be posting the recording for this class and the slides, and we'll be sending you the link within the next 24 hours. Lindsay, did you want to add anything?
No, just if you're interested in any of the reports and searches that I ran today using FedMind, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Archisha, who's listed here on the slides, that you'll all be receiving momentarily. And we look forward to hopefully having you during our webinar next week to conclude the series.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye, Alexia.
All right, take care.